In sports, we talk a lot about impact players who make a positive difference. When it comes to our state's economy, the North Carolina pork industry is a true MVP. Each year, the pork industry plays an important role in supporting rural communities across our state. It contributes more than $10 billion a year to the North Carolina economy and supports more than 44,000 jobs. Learn more about their positive impact at ncpork.org. The North Carolina Pork Council, the foundational partner of the North Carolina Sports Network.
Welcome back to the Old North State Tailgate presented by NC Pork. I'm Chris Edwards. Great to be with David Glenn. This week, our Old North State Tailgate and Traveling Sports Circus heading to Cullowhee for the big tilt between Furman and Western Carolina. We'll talk more about that with DG in just a couple of minutes. Thanks for tuning in. Please remember to subscribe on the platform you're watching or listening on, whether it's YouTube or Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Amazon Music, iHeart. Wherever you're watching the show, make sure you subscribe. And thanks for your support of our show. Another big week on the North Carolina Sports Network. Thursday morning, 9 a.m., the David Glenn Show with Kerwin Bell, the head coach of Western Carolina. Wild Dogs and Hogs, Friday morning at 9 a.m. Jim Knowles, the former Duke assistant coach and Ohio State defensive coordinator currently, sits down with Mike Waddell and Coach Jimmy Collins. You'll hear more about that in our show later on. And we're excited to launch Bold North State with Alex Gary, the athletic director at Western Carolina. All right, let's get into it. Time to break the huddle presented by the Original Saltworks. DG, looking back at games last week, we got to start in Durham. The big win for Duke. Blue Devils beat NC State. The Blue Devils win and only completed 4 passes in the whole game.
Yeah, that's an incredible statistic, Chris. And the reality, because Riley Leonard, Duke's star quarterback, was unavailable because of that ankle injury he suffered against Notre Dame, you're talking about a redshirt freshman, Henry Beelan IV of Duke, who had never really played a meaningful snap. He had gotten in late against a lesser opponent, but that's it. And here comes Peyton Wilson and NC State's defense to town. Meanwhile, State had made the switch from the veteran Brennan Armstrong to the true sophomore MJ Morris, who's a promising talent, but he only has 3 or 4 games of significant snaps in his 2-year career. So what did you know was going to be the bottom line once we knew Riley Leonard couldn't play? Which team could support its young quarterback better with some combination of a running game, maybe a big play from a wide receiver, field position, and all that other stuff, just to support the young guy to simplify his job description? Well, who did that better? Duke. Who won the game convincingly? Duke. Who feels good in year 2 under Mike Elko? Duke. Who feels a little shaky in year 11 under Dave Doran? NC State. And it really comes down to Duke's offensive line and veteran running back Jordan Waters, 13 carries, 123 yards. And remember, one of those was an 83-yard touchdown. And Jalen Calhoun, Duke's veteran receiver, he only had 1 catch, but it was the 69-yarder for a touchdown from Henry Beelan IV. Your number says a lot. 4 completions, and you win the game. This is 2023, isn't it? Not 1923. Duke gets it done, and Duke's dream season still has a chance of happening, whereas the Wolfpack is kind of picking up the pieces.
Yeah, State heading into a bye week this week. We'll talk more about the Blue Devils and the Wolfpack a little later on. All right, ECU, they dropped to 1-5 after a Thursday night home loss on national TV to SMU, a game that you were at with their Old North State Tailgate and Traveling Sports Circus. A lot of question marks continue for the Pirates.
Yeah, Mike Waddell and I had a lot of fun outside the stadium at Dowdy-Ficklin, meeting fans, throwing footballs, giving away prizes. We didn't have as much fun inside Dowdy-Ficklin Stadium. And the sad part, Chris, is that if you watch Mike Houston's team, the defense is actually fairly talented and hardworking and smart and limits big plays and makes their own big plays, as we saw when the Pirates were at App State, a couple of defensive touchdowns for the Pirates. The special teams are pretty solid, but when the Pirates have the ball, it's like the air comes out of that stadium, and we don't see the locker room, but I imagine the air might come out of the locker room too, and the culture of that program where one of the 3 phases is weighing this team down, and it's year 5 of Mike Houston, which has a lot of fans restless. It's a shame because SMU, of course, is on its way to both a good season and a promotion to the Atlantic Coast Conference. And the Pirates, who've been waving to the Big 12 and other major conferences for a long time, they're just not winning big or getting to big bowl games or posting top 25 seasons. They're the opposite of that right now because of that offense. We're at 1-5. People are talking about Mike Houston's job rather than the Pirates jostling for position in the next wave of realignment and expansion.
What about Wake Forest at Virginia Tech this past week? What do you make of the Demon Deacons?
Well, I think the bottom line is that Dave Clawson's record-setting bowl streak is in jeopardy. And everybody who's ever read my stuff, listened, or watched to our stuff knows I'm as big a Dave Clawson fan as there has been from the day he signed with Wake Forest. I think he miscalculated about his quarterback, Mitch Griffiths, much like Mike Houston did not self-evaluate the two quarterbacks he's been using this year. It's kind of a theme around our state this season, not at Carolina, of course, and a couple of other places, but if you're not good at quarterback, you've got some significant problems. And Dave Clawson told us on the David Glenn Show back in August, quote, if we're not as good as we think we should be, it's not going to be because of Mitch Griffiths, who's his veteran quarterback. I mean, he's a new starter, but he's been in the program for 4 years. Mitch has been one of the least productive quarterbacks in the entire conference. That showed up again in the loss to Virginia Tech. And Chris, when you look at the Deacons' schedule, they're 3-3. Remember, they still have Florida State. They still have to go to Duke for a Thursday night game. They still have to go to Notre Dame. They still have to play NC State and Syracuse, which are not world beaters, but they're not bad football teams. That streak of 7 straight bowls is in serious jeopardy. And much like the ECU situation, Wake is not a bad team in 3 phases. Wake is a bad team in 1 phase. And it's just pulling the entire team down right now in a way that I'm not sure they can rectify between now and bowl season.
Another team that's on some shaky footing right now is Appalachian State. The Mountaineers, a home loss on national TV last Tuesday to one of their biggest Sun Belt rivals in Coastal Carolina. A lot of folks not very happy in Boone right now.
Yeah, the tough part of this is the Mountaineers have been in 4 absolute nail-biter games this season in that start under Coach Clark. If 3 of the 4 go your way, you're in a pretty solid position. 3 of the 4 went the other way. It was the double overtime loss to the Tar Heels in Chapel Hill rather than a win. It was that crazy blocked field goal for a touchdown by Wyoming, to steal defeat from the jaws of victory, to turn that phrase upside down. And then another one. I mean, when you watch that game, it was a nice national TV spotlight for the Mountaineers in Boone. Coastal, by the way, had never won a game in Boone. I think they were 0-6 or 0-7 prior to that Tuesday night game. When you lose the game and now you've lost 3 of your 4 nail-biters, you can still have a bowl season, but we all know that the expectations and the bar is set in a much higher place at App State, right or wrong. And that means, some Mountaineers fans are howling about Sean Clark, just as we have hot seat discussions around Mike Houston at ECU, and even among some fans, Dave Doran at NC State. It just seems like Duke and Carolina are rocking and rolling. A few other programs in our state below the FBS level are also having sensational seasons. But at least 4 of the FBS teams in our state have fans howling about their head coach right now. And I guess that's just business as usual come mid-October.
Well, that's a good tease into our next segment. We'll talk more about that coming up. Also in our next segment, our Sport Clips MVP of the Week presented by Sport Clips. You'll hear from Mike Waddell and Coach Jimmy Collins as they sit down with Ohio State defensive coordinator and former Duke assistant Jim Knowles. And as we head into break here on the Old North State Tailgate, here are all the scores from last week's games involving North Carolina college football teams with our Jimmy scoreboard right here on the Old North State Tailgate. The original Saltworks has been serving the Wilmington area for over 50 years. Owner Bob Hubbard and his staff create a welcome atmosphere to go along with their home-cooked breakfast and lunch that simply cannot be rivaled anywhere in North Carolina. Eggs, waffles, hot dogs, crab cakes, and the best grits in the state. The Original Saltworks, a proud partner of the North Carolina Sports Network. Welcome back to our Old North State Tailgate presented by NC Fort. Chris Edwards, great to be with David Glenn. Don't forget this Saturday we'll be in Cullowhee for the big matchup between Furman and Western Carolina. Make sure you come on out and see us. The David Glenn Show Thursday, 9 a.m. This week's featured guest, Kerwin Bell, the head coach of Western Carolina. Wild Dogs and Hogs, Friday morning, 9 a.m. with Jim Knowles, the former Duke assistant and current defensive coordinator at Ohio State. And Bold North State, we're excited to launch that with Alex Gary, the AD at Western Carolina. That's available right now. All right, time to get back into it with DG, our hot reads of the week, presented by Lawson Insurance and High Street Insurance Partners. And DG, we teased it in our first segment. A lot of fan bases not happy right now. I mean, you've got Dave Doran, Sean Clark, Mike Houston, just to name a few that are on the hot seat. Now, fan bases can be a little temperamental, right? What do you make of things, the hot seat here as we talk in mid-October?
Well, I think administrators view the world one way and most fans view the world a much different way. So coach could be on the hot seat in the eyes of a chunk of the fan base and perfectly safe with the administration. But of course, the most alarming circumstances come when the fans are howling and the administrators are scrutinizing every last detail as well. One thing I've noticed about fans compared to administrators over the years is that I don't know if it's a majority, but a huge chunk of most fan bases, Chris, and you've seen this, you've been around the block, they measure not their current team against reality necessarily, as I might describe reality, but they measure 2023, for example, often against the best that they've ever seen. So instead of saying ECU, for example, in year 5 under Mike Houston, instead of saying, well, 2 of his 3 phases are pretty good. His 10-plus year track record as a head coach is really, really good. He deserves the benefit of the doubt. Many Pirates fans are saying, wait a minute, I remember when the Pirates went 11-1. I remember when the Pirates a couple times in the 1990s were top 25 program. I remember when Skip Holtz led the Pirates to back-to-back Conference USA titles in football when the Pirates were a member of that league prior to their jump to the American Athletic Conference. If you're viewing year 5 under Mike Houston against those peaks, of course you're going to want to fire him. If you want to take it a little more nuanced, well, he inherited a train wreck from Scotty Montgomery, right? And after 2 bad years, he took them to 2 of their best years as a member of the American Athletic Conference. Years 3 and year 4 were both bowl seasons. And again, 2 of their 3 winning seasons in the American have come under Mike Houston. Do you want to give him the benefit of the doubt in year 5? I mean, that varies person to person, even among administrators. But when you're comparing today against the best that ever was, Dave Doran is a very consistently successful coach at NC State. But if you compare him to the 11-win season of Phillip Rivers under Chuck Amato, or if you compare him to the Lou Holtz years, a century ago, not quite, or even, in the 1970s when the Wolfpack were not only good, they were winning the ACC title at times. If you compare the 2023 version of your favorite team to the best thing you can remember, almost all of them are going to be on the hot seat. A more nuanced approach, I think, allows for more patience, and that's where administrators most of the time are more patient than many fans because they see behind-the-scenes things related to resources. What league are you in? How tough is your competition? How long have you been there, right? Biff Poggi at Charlotte in year 1 deserves more leeway, a longer leash, more benefit of the doubt than a Mike Houston in year 5 at ECU. We can all see that part of the process. And Dave Doran's in his second decade, the beginning of his second decade at NC State. All that stuff matters far more, those nuances in the eyes of administrators making these multi-million-dollar decisions in a way that might not, make it into the conversation among the message board warriors. But here we are. I mean, 7 FBS programs in our state, and 5 are unhappy right now to varying degrees. And yes, Dave Doran, Mike Houston, Sean Clark at App State, who again, he's compared against 3-time national champion Jerry Moore. He's compared to Eli Drinkwitz, 1 year in App State, but he had him in the national top 25 as the Sun Belt champions. That's relatively recent history. Most of us would pale in comparison to even the best version of ourselves, whatever that was. But again, administrators make these calls but those administrators do have to listen to the fans when enough of the fan base is in an outrage. Then administrators start saying, well, it's expensive to fire this guy, but it's also expensive if these fans stop caring about our program. And those are the things that are going to be dissected between now and December. Fans can make up their mind in mid-October. Most administrators do not. That doesn't mean they might not be researching other candidates in November, but they're going to let the song play, as I like to phrase it. And I think it's good advice for most fans. Even if you're frustrated right now, see what your guy can do between now and the end of November. Maybe the picture is the same, but maybe he gives you a different reason for some hope.
Just to follow up to that, as we kind of wrap up our portion of this second segment, don't you think it's a little unfair now to be comparing some of these coaches, Dave Doran to Lou Holtz, Mike Houston to Skip Holtz? The landscape of college football has certainly changed within the last 5 to 7 years.
No doubt about it. I'm a big picture guy, Chris. Like I ask myself, on the one hand, Mike Houston, he's in a league, the American, that is more manageable now. So in that sense, I would grade him a little tougher now that Cincinnati is gone and UCF is gone and Houston is gone, teams that were winning AAC championships in football. Theoretically, your neighborhood is not as tough in that example. In other examples, your neighborhood is a lot tougher. I mean, NC State in the 1970s, with all due respect, Florida State hadn't arrived yet. Clemson was not the superpower it has been for much of the last decade. It's no wonder. I mean, at least remember that whereas Dave Doran and NC State have not been winning ACC titles in football for a long time, well, guess what? Carolina's last one is in 1980. And Wake has one in a long, long time. And Duke has a half of one in a long, long time. So just remember that, again, athletic directors tend to see that bigger picture, often have conversations with their coaches about expectations. And fans' expectations are almost always, on average, higher and often unrealistic compared to what presidents, chancellors, athletic directors, and coaches know is the reality. You still have to occasionally catch lightning in a bottle, right? Maybe Mac Brown's doing it at Carolina right now. Maybe Mike Elko's doing it for 2 years in a row at Duke. But none of the programs at the FBS level in our state are going to be steamroller, perennial power, double-digit win total teams right now in the short term. I love to dream big. I hope that picture changes. But anybody expecting that at their favorite school right now in this state at the FBS level, they would not want to be judged by those same unreasonable standards at their place of work as they're applying those same standards to the coach of their favorite team.
All right, time for our Sport Clips MVP of the week presented by Sport Clips. Mike, Jimmy, they sit down with former Duke assistant coach and current Ohio State defensive coordinator Jim Knowles. Mike?
Thank you, Chris. We do have Jim Knowles, the defensive coordinator from Ohio State, with us. Coach, big game against Penn State this week, but I think every game that you play at Ohio State has to be considered a big game. How do you manage to keep your emotions and your momentum always at that peak level when going into big games like you'll face this weekend against Penn State?
Well, you hit the nail on the head there. I mean, it's you're not allowed to lose at Ohio State. So you just maintain a high level of intensity and anxiousness, and it never goes away. That's just the reality of being at Ohio State.
Jim, do me a favor. Since you've been in the ACC, you've been in the SEC, you've been you're in the Big Ten now, you've been in the Big 12. I know how you work because we spent a lot of time in meeting rooms together. Tell me how your philosophy has changed or progressed as you've gone from conference to conference.
It was just when you and I were together, it was just starting to get into the hurry up offense, and we were changing and adapting to that. And then by the time I got to the Big 12, it was all, the Big 12 at the time was all about trying to stretch you vertically and taking deep shots and taking advantage of, what you give them and the opportunity. So had to adjust when I got out there and try to keep things in front more. And now in the Big Ten, it's really a mix. I mean, it's not quite the Big Ten of old where people are just trying to run the ball and grind you for 4 quarters. There's a mix. So, I'm really utilizing a balance of what I learned in the ACC and the Big 12, to compete here in the Big Ten.
That's an interesting thought. I'll tell you the other thing that as I progress through my career and I see where you are now, the level of player that you're doing things with changes your philosophy at times also. Is that not true?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I mean, those times where, you feel you typically would want to mix it up or do things differently or be creative. When you have a higher caliber of player, you got to be careful. You got to balance it. You got to, just give them a chance to make the plays, without putting them in bad position.
Jim, the interesting thing is it's nice to have guys that can step with the wrong foot, end up in the wrong gap, and tackle it for a 2-yard loss. It really makes a very difficult job, which you have in the competition. It makes it a little bit easier. But just very quickly, compare the level of play in the 3 major conferences that you've been in. I know philosophies have changed, offenses have changed, and you really just gave us an idea of that earlier. But give me a couple of sentences on how that has affected you and what you've done there.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, I don't know, Jim, you've been around a while too. I don't know if it's so much the conference, like people say, as it is the times. I mean, the times change and the trends change. So you really have to be willing to change your philosophy based on the trends and what's happening out there. So, I don't see as much differences between the conferences as I just see the differences in the times and what's happening.
Now that's interesting. I agree. As I watch the game now, I do see that. Here's the major thing that I think affects all of it, Jim. And I really don't have great deal of experience with this. And there's 2 things: NIL and transfer portal. Mm-hmm. What's the philosophy with you guys as you deal with all that?
Well, I think we're keeping up with the NIL. I mean, the good thing about being at Ohio State is right. I really don't have to deal with it a whole lot. We have a whole group who's and they're doing it professionally. That you're not going to. It's Ohio State, so there's a long history, long tradition. Nobody's going to go out and do anything crazy, because right. That's not just what the fan base believes in. So I think we're keeping up with the times, but we're also not going out there NIL and just trying to buy players. It's just not the way that Ohio State works. They're doing it professionally by the numbers. Transfer portal, fortunately, being at Ohio State, we've taken a couple. Right. And we've lost a couple. Of guys. I think it's a good thing. Obviously you always want to have some controls on it, but I think it's a good thing. Coaches can move, players should be able to move. And you and I know, Jim, a lot of times you get to Ohio State and kids are recruited and maybe they find out, hey, I just can't do it here at this school, at this program. So, they need an opportunity to move. But we're not huge in picking guys up, but a couple key guys here or there. We've had some good transfers and it's helped us.
Last question for you from me, Jim, and this you can tell me it's none of my business. Head coaching, is it in your future at any point?
It's so, as you know, Jim, it's so hard to predict in this profession. There's no ladder to climb, really. Sometimes it's sideways, sometimes it's up. Obviously, you work as hard as you can, and you want to grow where you're planning, and you want to do a good job. And in the end, if things come to you, they come to you. Through hard work, and you remain open at that point. I think we all remain open throughout our career after the season when that time comes. And as long as you do a good job, maybe you'll get an opportunity.
Great answer, and I think you're well deserving of an opportunity to do that, Jim.
Appreciate that, Jim. Thanks.
We're talking with Jim Knowles. He is the defensive coordinator for the number 3 ranked Ohio State Buckeyes, in action this weekend in Columbus at the Horseshoe against the 7th ranked Nittany Lions of Penn State. The game will be broadcast on Fox. And Coach, as you look at your career, you've been a position coach, you've been a coordinator where you are right now, you've also been a head coach at your alma mater at Cornell. What pressures do you think were unique to being a head coach at the place where you played, as opposed to being a head coach where maybe you didn't know all the nuances of the job?
Well, as a head coach, you feel a tremendous sense of responsibility, to the players, to the university. And I feel that just, if that's your alma mater, I feel that gets even compounded. Cornell certainly not at this level football wise, but it's still it was very important to me when I was there, because it is your alma mater and you want to do a good job.
As a defensive coordinator, obviously you're in charge of the defense, but having been a head coach, did it make a difference in how you went and approached this opportunity at Ohio State, at Oklahoma State? What does a defensive coordinator, I mean, everybody hears that term, but what does that mean? Are you the head coach of the defense and you make all of the decisions for defense, or is it something to where you will compile all of the suggestions and take them up to your head coach, Ryan Day?
Well, you're a middle manager for sure. I mean, in the corporate structure, you have to put the plan together. You got to be organized. You got to utilize your resources and the different minds and the other assistants that work with you. You got to get everybody on the same page. So, yeah, you are running your own department. You're running the defense, and you're in charge of all aspects of it. But you also have to answer to the head coach. So that's all we all always have someone to answer. So anytime the head coach is going to have an opinion, you have to react to that. You got to keep that in mind. You got to have an idea of what his overall plan is for the team. And you have to always buy in to his leadership and his vision.
We're at the midpoint of this 2023 season. Your team is 6-0. After this weekend, you have a pair of road games at Wisconsin, at Rutgers, home against Michigan State and Minnesota, before the big battle against Michigan. How tough is it to corral 18 to 23-year-olds, maybe 24-year-olds in some cases with the COVID year, to stay focused on playing the game that is in front of them instead of looking ahead to the obvious big game at the end of the year against that school up north?
It's all about routine. It's all about habits, and you stress those habits and the routine, and they are young men, but we're training them for life too. So you're creating good habits. You're teaching them how to produce results week to week in a stressful environment, where the demands are high. And these are lessons that are going to go with them through life. So you just build the habits, and you stress the routine, and you just rinse and repeat over and over again.
We'd be remiss if we didn't ask you about your all-star linebacker, Tommy Eichenberg. Tell me about what kind of a player he is. You know, the name of our show that Jimmy and I do here on the North Carolina Sports Network is called Wild Dogs and Hogs. I like the big offensive lineman. Jimmy is a wild dog guy. Is Eichenberg what you would call a wild dog? What kind of a player is he? What kind of a person is he?
Yeah, he's a guy that Jim Collins would love. He doesn't say a word. He's a guy that understands the big picture, and he knows where the ball is going to end up given the call. So he plays a lot faster than his combine numbers would be, because he sees the game, and he's making more and more checks for us on the field, which is really a positive thing for our defense. But yeah, he is a genuine tough guy and a fighter.
You have two young guys in Cody Simon and Steel Chambers. Could you have a better nickname or a name, I guess, than Steel Chambers if you're a linebacker? But has Eichenberg been a good leader, a mentor to these guys, trying to get them to, raise their level of play as you turn into the next chapter of this season?
Yeah, absolutely. And he does it by letting them see how he prepares, maybe less with words, but I think leadership a lot in our game. It's a tough man's game, and people look at what you do. They look at what you eat, how you live, your habits, how you study, and that's really how you impart that leadership to younger guys is by doing things the right way, and they see that.
Jim, we appreciate your time here on the North Carolina Sports Network before your big matchup against Penn State. Good luck to you and the Buckeyes, and hopefully we can talk to you again as you march on through the college football playoff and come January, hopefully playing for a national championship there in Columbus.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. Good to see you, JC.
Good to see you, Jim. Good luck to you, my man.
All right, Mike, thanks so much. When we come back, DG and I will go inside our XL Moving and Storage Big Four Games of the Week. That's next on the Old North State Tailgate, presented by NC4. The oldest restaurant in New Hanover County has a brand new look, feel, and taste, making it the #1 place for great food in Wrightsville Beach. Owner Jimmy Galeese and his wife Keaton have poured their hearts and soul into the reformation of this North Carolina coastal classic restaurant, and the impact has been fantastic. King Neptune serves fresh fish, chicken, and steak, and has an amazing wine and spirits to lift your dining experience to make it the best at the beach. Come taste the creations of Chef Chavez, and you'll know that you have tasted a little bit of heaven right there in Wrightsville Beach. That's King Neptune. Call them at 910-239-3055 and make your reservation now. King Neptune in Wrightsville Beach, a proud partner of the North Carolina Sports Network.
H-A-G-G-I-E, B-R-I-D-E, what? Give me that, give me that, give me that, give me that, what? I said A-G-G-I-E, what? B-R-I-D-E, what? Give me that, give me that, give me that, give me that.
Sport Clips is like no other place you've ever gotten your haircut. Sports everywhere, TVs everywhere, playing sports, and guys, smart stylists who know how to give you the haircut you want and the haircut you need. You don't ever need an appointment. Walk-ins are welcome, and you'll walk out feeling like an MVP, guaranteed. Be sure to ask about the MVP experience, as it's something you just can't put into words. Awesome haircut, hot steam towel, invigorating shampoo, neck and shoulder treatment. It takes a haircut and turns it into an event. Sport Clips, a proud partner of the North Carolina Sports Network. Welcome back to the Old North State Tailgate presented by NC Pork. I'm Chris Edwards. Great to be with David Glenn. Don't forget this Saturday we're in Cullowhee for the big matchup between Furman and Western Carolina. Come on out and see us. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you're watching or listening on, and tell your friends about it too. Thanks so much for the support of our show. The David Glenn Show, Thursdays at 9 a.m. This week's featured guest, Kerwin Bell, the head coach at Western Carolina, and Bold North State with Alex Gary, the athletic director at Western Carolina. That's now available on the North Carolina Sports Network. All right, time to go inside our XL Moving and Storage Big Four games of the week, and we'll start with the big one in the Big Ten. A pair of undefeated teams, a pair of top 10 teams. They're going to clash at the Horseshoe on Saturday as Penn State visits Ohio State.
Yeah, Chris, there are only 8 undefeated FBS teams remaining, and these are 2 of them going head-to-head in Columbus. This game has Big Ten championship game repercussions, the last year of our 4-team college football playoff type repercussions. And remember, Ohio State still has to visit 6-0 Michigan later in the season, that regular season finale. Penn State still has to host Michigan in mid-November. So this circus in the Big Ten is not over yet. For those who haven't seen these 2, they're 2 of the best defenses in the country. They're both giving up fewer than 10 points per game, which is just an insane number in 2023 college football. When the Buckeyes have the ball in this one, Marvin Harrison Jr., famous football name at wide receiver, Emeka Egbuka is also probably going to be a first-round NFL draft pick. And what I love about these matchups, besides the obvious 6-0 against 6-0, Penn State has a corner named Kalen King, who's probably going to be a first-round pick. So you got 2 wide receivers for the Buckeyes, at least 1 corner for the Nittany Lions, all first-round projections. And on some plays, at least, they're going to be going head-to-head. Similarly, Penn State has a left tackle. His name is Olu Fashanu. He is 6'7", 317. Ohio State has an edge rusher where you would get this right as the brilliant play-by-play man that you are. I'm going to try it. JT Tuimoloau.
It's pretty good.
He's a first-rounder. So you got a left tackle first-rounder for Penn State, an end rusher first-rounder for the Buckeyes. And again, that's not just populating the field with future pros. Often they're head-to-head against each other. So that is beyond our neighborhood. The rest of our slate, of course, is much closer to home. But if you don't get excited about 6-0 Penn State, 6-0 Ohio State, 2 top 10 teams, nice national TV window on Fox, you're not really a college football fan unless you're at least peeking around the country for some of these style great matchups.
All right, you want to give me a pick? Who you like in this game?
I got to go with Ohio State. When in doubt, if you're just not sure, go with the home team in these kinds of things. And, oh, by the way, this surprised me. Ohio State has had the much better of this rivalry lately. It's 10 of the last 11 for the Buckeyes, which I would not have guessed because James Franklin has had Penn State on a pretty good track lately. The Nittany Lions have not won in Columbus since 2011. And, of course, these 2 play each other every year, every other year at the other guy's place. So those are long streaks that favor the Buckeyes. It doesn't take me or the wise guys or anybody else to play it safe and take the Buckeyes.
All right, let's go closer to home now. How about the Duke Blue Devils? Another prime time Saturday night game, ABC. The Blue Devils in front of the big national TV audience. They're at Florida State, undefeated Florida State. Now Riley Leonard is like the rest of us. He's day-to-day, so we don't know a whole lot about the status of the Duke quarterback. But, man, what a turnaround. What a job Mike Elko has done. Regardless of the outcome of this game Saturday, Duke still has a chance to play in Charlotte at the end of the year.
No doubt about it. These teams are both undefeated in conference play. Obviously, the Devils' only loss was to non-conference Notre Dame. Let me hit you with a quick question that I've been asking my buddies who have texted and called me this week, Chris. Don't feel bad if you don't know the answer because I've been paid to cover the ACC for 37 years, and I did not know the answer. Do you remember Duke's football win over Florida State?
No.
Real quickly,
No.
off the top of your head.
I don't.
Okay. That's the correct answer because it has never happened. It has never happened. I looked this up. There are about 50 college football opponents. I put aside the teams that Duke has only played once or twice or 3 times ever. That's just a little bit not enough body of evidence, so to speak, right? Of the 50 teams that the Devils have played the most often, they have and 0 for record against only 2. They're 0 for 6 against Michigan, which is understandable given both schools' football histories. They are 0 for 21 against the Florida State Seminoles. And Chris, I looked up the scores because I'm a geek for this kind of stuff. In those 21 Florida State victories, again, 21-0 all time against Duke in football, 20 were blowouts. There was one close game. It was a few years ago when David Cutcliffe was in Durham.
Mm-hmm.
This has been a hide your eyes rivalry from the Duke perspective. I do think Seminoles are more talented. I will pick the Seminoles to win this game. I wish Riley Leonard was healthy because a dual threat quarterback can give FSU's great defense some headaches at times. I don't know if a redshirt freshman, Henry Beelan IV, can be asked. Can you imagine being asked to go to Tallahassee in your second career start, if this happens this way, and in front of the Doak Campbell crowd on national TV on ABC on a Saturday night? Like, hey, I thought it was a big challenge to ask Riley Leonard, the veteran, to beat Clemson on national TV. He pulled it off on Labor Day night. I don't feel good about the vibe of this game for Duke's trip to Tallahassee. I hope I'm wrong about that. They're both teams, of course, are nationally ranked and deservedly so. It would be a shock of the system if Duke somehow gets a win. And I say that even if somehow Riley Leonard is both healthy enough to play, but also healthy enough to be that dual threat guy that drove Clemson's really good Clemson defense crazy on Labor Day night.
We'll end this game with this thought. You look at Duke this year: Clemson, Notre Dame, NC State, Florida State, all primetime games for the Blue Devils. What does that say about the culture that Mike Elko has created around this Duke football program?
It's incredible, Chris. I started covering Duke when Steve Spurrier was their coach, late 80s. They were really interesting. They caught the attention of the nation. Mm-hmm. Spurrier was throwing the ball around. They were putting up some huge passing totals. They had some exciting quarterbacks. They shared that ACC title back in 1989. And then, man, it was the desert for a while. There were winless seasons at Duke. 1-win seasons, 2-win seasons, 3-win seasons. They were mostly an afterthought, with only a couple of exceptions, seriously, for about 20-plus years. Then David Cutcliffe did some good things, and right now Mike Elko is doing some great things. When you do great things, the nation pays attention. You know, Duke is in these national spotlight games in part because Mike Elko put together an ACC Coach of the Year season last year with 9 wins at a school that very rarely gets to 9 wins. So it's good for the Duke football brand, of course, but, you know, on the narrower path, it's just exciting to see Duke as a serious candidate to play in the ACC title game, something they've only managed once since the creation of that game.
All right, game number 3, the game we're going to be at with our Old North State Tailgate and Traveling Sports Circus this week. The big one in Cullowhee, the Catamounts and the Furman Paladins, winner in the driver's seat there in the Southern Conference. And both these teams, regardless of the outcome of this game, have a legitimate case and an at-large for the FCS playoffs.
Yeah, man, I hope folks will check out my long-form interview with Kerwin Bell, because in my introduction of Coach Bell, I get into the history of Western Carolina football. And Coach Bell is in the process, at the very least, of having back-to-back winning seasons. That's only been done once in, like, my lifetime at Western Carolina. He has them in the national top 25 for the first time, or I should say the last time they finished in the top 25 was 1984. So that's a long, almost 40 years ago. He has him in at least one of the polls in the FCS top 10. Mm-hmm. So he is fighting an uphill battle. He is only in year 3. In Western's almost 50 years as a member of the Southern Conference, they have never won the SoCon football title. Furman's done it a whole bunch of times. And that's their opponent this weekend, of course. I don't believe it's an exaggeration, Chris. I'll say this. Numerically speaking, there has never been a top 10 versus top 10 game for Western Carolina football at Whitmire Stadium in Cullowhee. Never. Until this Saturday. That's why I don't feel like I'm exaggerating when I say it's the biggest regular season game in school history. You have, obviously, FCS playoff invitation repercussions, but if Kerwin Bell, who, when he was hired at Western Carolina, legendary coach Steve Spurrier, who hired Kerwin Bell for 1 year as a graduate assistant way back in 1990, Coach Spurrier was quoted saying, Kerwin Bell will bring championships to Cullowhee. Now, keep in mind, I mean, Coach Spurrier wants to back his guy and wants to be, bold and a big supporter. There are no championships in Cullowhee in football. With all due respect, I say that as a matter of fact. I take no joy in these historical tidbits. But that's a big statement. Kerwin will bring championships to Cullowhee? What? Nobody brings championships to Cullowhee in football. Kerwin may be in the process of doing exactly that. Coach Bell has the Catamounts in the top 5 scoring offenses in the entire country. Remember, he's the guy that averaged 52 points a game at Valdosta State when that school won the Division II national championship under Kerwin Bell's leadership. It's a goal. He wants to lead the nation in scoring again, like 41 points per game, and I think he's 5th in the nation right now. He's like, really, DG? We're going to have to crank it up a little bit and finish first, which he did at his previous 2 head coaching stops. It is an unbelievable story, Chris. I hope you and everybody else check out our interview. I'm writing about it as well. They've hit the transfer portal. They've hit the state of Florida really hard, where Coach Bell was born, raised, coached, an assistant coach, Gators player, SEC player of the year, SEC champion as a quarterback back in 1984. There are fascinating angles to this Western Carolina football resurgence. And frankly, I've been at this a long time. I'm excited about being in Cullowhee on Saturday afternoon. I hope folks will come find us next to Whitmire Stadium. Mike Waddell and I will be there. I have covered college football games, Chris, at more than 20 stadiums in our state. And I've covered games at every FCS and FBS team except for one. Now, I've been to Western's campus several times, but never to cover a football game until this week. That ends. My bucket list is checked. And I can't think of a better occasion than top 5 Furman, well-coached, perennial power, undefeated in conference play, only losses to the South Carolina Gamecocks of the SEC, just like the Catamounts' only losses to the Arkansas Razorbacks of the SEC. When they're playing in their weight class, these teams have been unbeatable. And when it has been close, they've managed a way to win. This is as big as it gets at the FCS level in our state, and I'm thrilled that our traveling sports circus is going to be a part of it.
You want to make a pick in this game?
I got to take the Catamounts, man.
Absolutely.
I'm not going a 10-hour round trip to Cullowhee to see them lose, baby. And I'm joking because obviously these players and coaches and administrators and fans who have invested in this program during this 3-year turnaround. Again, they won 1 game, Chris, the year before Coach Bell got there. 1. They had a building year, then a winning year, just barely a winning record. And now national top 10 in one of the polls. Are you kidding me? This doesn't happen. I have a tremendous amount of respect for Furman. They're good almost always. They're a perennial power in FCS football. I think Coach Kerwin Bell and the Catamounts, Cole Gonzalez is the quarterback, phenomenally accurate, fun-to-watch passer. Desmond Reed is leading the SoCon in rushing. He's a Miami area signee, straight from the high school ranks, who looks like a Florida recruit, and I mean can giddy up when he needs to giddy up. Sincere Lee is their top wide receiver. All 3 of those guys are Florida guys. All 3 are sophomores. So they signed with Kerwin Bell before he got it rolling, and now it's paying off. And Coach Bell was, maybe I was more emotional than he was, but he was telling the stories of the 5-year guys who went through the trials and tribulations in the 1-loss season, but stayed. And now they're, maybe being paid off with what could be the football memories of a lifetime. I'm excited, man. Sorry to interrupt you. I'm rambling, but I'm jacked up about our trip to Cullowhee. I can't wait.
Make sure you go see DG and Mike on Saturday in Cullowhee for Furman and Western Carolina. All right, last game we're going to talk about this week in our Big 4 game of the week. How about the one in Greenville? Both teams in bad need of a win. Charlotte 1-5 at 1-5 ECU. We say both teams need a win, but in my mind, it's a must-win game for Mike Houston and the Pirates.
I agree with you. Here, the parallels are this. I actually think they're competitive teams, both in 2 of the 3 phases of the game. At both schools, their offenses have been horrific. At both schools, it's not only about the quarterback, but none of the rotating multi-headed monsters at QB have been good at all. And it's just depressing the program. It's bringing down the vibe in the locker room. It's sucking the air out of the stadium. Those are the parallels. The contrasts include Biff Poggi, who's beating himself up right now. If you saw his press conference this week, it was like, I know this is a Pirates reference, but he threw himself on the proverbial sword, Biff Poggi did. He's a bold guy. He's an aggressive guy. He's an outspoken guy, kind of talks his team up, almost pokes the media sometimes. And he realizes 1-5 is not backing up your big words. So he just said, this starts with me. I'm soul searching. I'm dissecting things. He actually said, I love how hard my players are playing. I love how hard my coaches are coaching. This starts with me. This is a Biff Poggi problem. And I think that resonates in any fan base. The contrasts with Mike Houston, of course, are A, he's in year 5, unlike Biff Poggi's year 1, which we talked about earlier. But B, Mike Houston, it's not all about press conferences, but I'm just trying to give an example, a little capsule. Mike Houston spent part of his press conference this week backpedaling, answering questions about why did you punt on 4th and 2 from your own 30-something yard line in a national TV game against SMU when theoretically you could still win. Now, the truth serum answer is my offense has trouble getting first downs, much less touchdowns, so I figured I'd better punt so the scoreboard doesn't get even worse. But this is at a school, Chris, where famously the legendary coach and offensive guru Steve Logan said, when you coach at East Carolina, you go for it every time, That's the backdrop. So it's not only Mike Houston 1-5 in year 5, it's punting on 4th and 2 in the fourth quarter on national TV. And Mike and I were there in front of a crowd that wasn't, packing the stadium, but was pretty decent to come see a team that was on the way to a 1-5 record. The dynamics are so different. Charlotte just got promoted to the American Athletic Conference, and they've only existed as a program for about a decade. The Pirates have been shunned by the Big 12 and others for the last decade during these rounds of realignment and expansion. So they're both 1-5, but man, the tenor around those 1-5 are totally different in Greenville and in Charlotte. And as you said, Mike Houston, as a result, desperately needs this win more than Biff Poggi and the 49ers do.
Do you have a pick for Saturday's game between the Pirates and the 49ers?
My pick is to watch more interesting games with functional offenses. That's sarcastic. I apologize. No, I'll take ECU at home. I do think ECU has a pretty solid defense, and Charlotte has no confidence offensively. Maybe the Pirates can score on defense again, or give the offense some short fields so that either Mason Garcia or Alex Flynn can just build some confidence and get in the end zone and get the crowd into that game. If the 49ers lead early, there's going to be a lot of stressful people on the Pirates sidelines. I can promise you that. But I do think ECU has a little bit more talent overall, and I think that ECU defense is capable of leading the way to a win.
All right, time for our closing thought presented by Organize for Success. Get us out of here on your closing thought today, DG.
Well, one, I'm excited that we have so many fun stories to follow in this state. I know I've said that in previous weeks, but Lenore Rhine is undefeated in the national top 10 at the Division II level. NC Central is the FCS HBCU national defending champion, and they have a chance of getting back to that game and winning it again. They're ranked in the national top 10, the Eagles of Central, for the first time in their history as an FCS program. Obviously, Duke and Carolina are among the big stories to follow at the FBS level. So I'm excited about that. But in the background, it's that other of our favorite stories to follow. It's this trip to Western Carolina that I've been just fawning over. It is really, really, really hard at any school to turn around a program this dramatically, this quickly. What do they used to say? It takes, it's one thing to turn a speedboat in the other direction. It's another thing to turn around, one of those freight carriers. It's a much longer U to turn it around. Kerwin Bell, without flipping the speedboat, has turned it around on a dime thanks to the transfer portal and his dynamic offensive principles and the pipeline to the state of Florida. I hope folks will check out our interviews, my articles, see us, as you said, next to Whitmire Stadium in Cullowhee. This is truly one of the most I don't mind watching, we're talking about Penn State against Ohio State, right? That's exciting. Don't get me wrong. That's 6-0 against 6-0 at the FBS level. But the majority of success stories that we follow in all of our favorite college sports are at schools that have been there, done that. Sometimes they've been there, done that over and over and over and over and over, and we're surprised when they're not at that high level. This is not that at Western Carolina. Kerwin Bell led the Florida Gators as a redshirt freshman quarterback to an SEC title at a time where, guess what? Georgia and Alabama had been winning all of the SEC titles in the 70s and early 80s. Sound familiar? They're doing it again now. Georgia and Alabama were the freight train proven juggernauts. Somehow, Florida, led by young Kerwin Bell quarterback, wins the SEC title in 1984. And that was before Steve Spurrier and others got the Gators to that higher brand recognition. He's essentially doing as a head coach as we speak at Western Carolina what he did as a quarterback for the Florida Gators. And this is just not kind of hard. It's just really freaking hard. And I respect the heck out of that. I don't know what's going to happen against Furman, but I hope people can see and appreciate the big picture. Something's cooking in Cullowhee, Chris Edwards. And we're excited to be there to see it this Saturday.
And we appreciate you joining us, as always, on the Old North State Tailgate. It's an exclusive presentation of the North Carolina Sports Network. Check out all of DG's great work at ncsportsnetwork.com. Don't forget to subscribe and rate our podcast, whatever platform you're watching or listening on, and tell your friends about it, too. Thanks to our foundational partner, the North Carolina Port Council. Thanks again to Jim Knowles, our special guest this week. For David Glenn, I'm Chris Edwards, signing off for this edition of the Old North State Tailgate, the official tailgating soundtrack of the 2023 football season, right here on the North Carolina Sports Network.